The coldest words she ever heard weren't screamed in anger, but spoken with a chilling, dismissive smirk. As a single tear traced a path through her carefully applied makeup, her husband, soon-to-be ex, leaned back in his expensive leather chair. "Tears, Clara. Really? What are you even crying for? You're getting more than you deserve for 15 years of doing nothing." He adjusted his ridiculously expensive Patek Philippe watch. Little did he know that single tear wasn't one of sadness, but of fire being forged. He thought he was closing a chapter on his boring domestic life. He had no idea he was witnessing the prologue to the rise of a titan. The conference room on the 48th floor of the prestigious law firm Blackwood and Finch felt like a mausoleum. The air was thick with the scent of old leather, expensive wood polish, and unspoken animosity. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny and different witness to the methodical dismantling of a life. Clara Reed sat perfectly still, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white mountains on a pale landscape. Across the vast mahogany table, Richard Sterling, her husband of 15 years, exuded an aura of bored triumph. He was a man sculpted by ambition and arrogance. His suit was a custom-tailored Tom Ford, his hair was perfectly coiffed, and the smirk playing on his lips was a permanent fixture, a testament to a life lived without consequence. Beside him sat his lawyer, a shark in a pinstripe suit named Arthur Vance, who shuffled papers with a practiced predatory calm. Clara's own lawyer, Isabella "Izzy" Rossi, a friend since college and a firebrand in the courtroom, sat beside her, radiating a quiet fury. Izzy's pen tapped a staccato rhythm against her legal pad, the only sound betraying her frustration. "So we are in agreement," Arthur Vance stated, his voice a smooth baritone that slid over the tense silence. "Mr. Sterling will retain the primary residence in Greenwich, the Aspen Ski Lodge, the majority of the art collection, and his full stake in Sterling Capital Partners. Mrs. Reed will receive the smaller apartment in the city, the vehicle currently in her possession, and a one-time alimony payment of $500,000, along with a monthly stipend of $10,000 for a period of 24 months. Each word was a hammer blow, cracking the foundation of the world Clara had so carefully built. 15 years. 15 years of sacrificing her own burgeoning career in software engineering to support his. 15 years of hosting his business dinners, charming his clients, raising their 2 children who were now away at college, and managing a household that ran with the precision of a Swiss watch so he could focus on becoming the Wall Street titan he was today. All of it reduced to a city apartment and a 2-year countdown to financial uncertainty. "This is an insult," Izzy hissed, her voice low but sharp. Clara was an integral part of Richard's success. She was his partner in every sense of the word. Her intellectual and emotional labor built the platform from which he launched his entire career. Richard chuckled, a dry, grating sound. "Intellectual labor, Izzy, please. Clara's great intellectual contribution was deciding between salmon and sea bass for dinner parties. Let's not be dramatic." The condescension in his voice was a physical thing, a slap that made Clara flinch. She had a master's degree from MIT, a mind that could once untangle complex algorithms with startling elegance. She'd put it all on hold for him, for their family, a choice she had made willingly out of love. A love he was now grinding into dust under the heel of his Italian leather shoe. "Richard, don't," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. He leaned forward, his blue eyes as cold and hard as glaciers. "Don't what, Clara?" "Don't state the facts. You haven't worked a real job in over a decade. What marketable skills do you possess?" "Planning a charity gala." "Your intellectual property is a collection of recipe cards and the gardener's phone number. This settlement is generous. It's a golden parachute back into a world you are completely unprepared for." It was the cruelty, the casual, deliberate cruelty, that finally broke her composure. A single hot tear escaped her eye and slid down her cheek. It felt like a betrayal, a sign of the weakness he so despised. And he saw it, and he saw. His smirk widened into a triumphant grin. "Oh, look at that," he said, gesturing with a manicured hand. "Tears. Are you actually crying?" What are you even crying for? You're getting $500,000 for doing nothing. Most people would kill for that kind of severance package." He leaned back, hooking his thumbs into his suspenders, a caricature of a Wall Street king. "Honestly, Clara, pull yourself together. It's unbecoming." The venom in his words was so potent it seemed to suck the air from the room. He wasn't just divorcing her, he was erasing her. He was rewriting their shared history to cast her as a freeloader, a decorative accessory he was now discarding for a newer model, Tiffany Vance Arthur's own niece, a 20-something Instagram influencer whose primary skill was pouting for selfies on private jets. Clara had seen the pictures, the blatant evidence of their affair that Richard hadn't even bothered to hide. Izzy placed a hand on Clara's arm. "Don't let him get to you." But it was too late. The dam of her composure had been breached. The hurt, the humiliation, the sheer injustice of it all washed over her. She thought of the late nights she'd spent helping him edit proposals, the brilliant business strategies she'd suggested that he'd later claimed as his own, the sacrifices she'd made without a second thought. All of it dismissed as nothing. "Just sign the papers, Clara," Richard said, his voice laced with impatience. "Let's end this farce. I have a tea time at 11. With a shaking hand, Clara picked up the pen. Its weight felt immense, a scepter of her own defeat. She looked at Richard, at the man she had once loved with every fiber of her being, and saw a complete stranger. A hollow man filled with nothing but greed and ego. She saw the ghost of the young, ambitious man she'd fallen for, and realized he had been dead for a very long time. She signed her name. The ink was as black as her despair. As she pushed the papers across the table, their gazes met one last time. There was no remorse in his eyes, no flicker of shared memory, only cold, hard victory. He had won. He had taken everything and left her with the scraps. As she and Izzy stood to leave, Richard couldn't resist one final jab. "And Clara," he called out as she reached the door, "do try to be smart with that money. It's a lot more than you'll ever see again." The click of the door closing behind her was the sound of her old life ending. Walking down the marble-floored hallway, Clara felt a profound emptiness, a void where her future used to be. The tear he had mocked was dry on her cheek, but the fire it had ignited was just beginning to smolder. He thought he was leaving her with nothing. He was wrong. He was leaving her with the one thing she hadn't had in 15 years' freedom, and a rage so pure it would become the fuel for a revolution he could never have imagined. The city apartment Richard had so generously allowed her to keep felt less like a home and more like a beautifully appointed prison cell. It was modern, sterile, and entirely devoid of the warmth and history of the Greenwich house she'd been exiled from. For 2 weeks, Clara moved through the space like a ghost, a specter haunting the life she used to know. The silence was the loudest thing in the apartment, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant symphony of city traffic. The $10,000 monthly stipend felt like a leash, a constant reminder of her dependency of Richard's final parting insult. Her days were a blur of numb routine. Waking up, staring at the ceiling, forcing herself to eat, and then staring out the window at a city that felt alien and hostile. Her friends called their voices, thick with pity, offering lunches and distractions she had no energy for. She was adrift in a sea of her own failure, the echoes of Richard's taunts. "What marketable skills do you possess?" playing on a torturous loop in her mind. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, desperate for anything to distract from the crushing weight of her own thoughts, she decided to tackle the last vestiges of her old life, a dozen dusty boxes that had been moved from the Greenwich attic. They were filled with artifacts from a forgotten era, her life before Richard. She sliced open the first box with a kitchen knife. Inside were old college textbooks, their pages filled with her neat, precise handwriting. Advanced data structures, quantum computing theory, algorithmic design. Names that once thrilled her now seemed like a foreign language. She ran her fingers over the titles, a flicker of a long-forgotten person stirring within her. The girl who coded for fun. The girl who saw the world as a series of elegant problems waiting for equally elegant solutions. Where had that girl gone? Deeper in the box beneath a faded MIT sweatshirt was a worn leather-bound journal. Its cover was embossed with a single word, synapse. Her breath caught in her throat. She pulled it out, the leather cool against her fingertips. She hadn't thought about synapse in almost 2 decades. It was her senior thesis project, her passion, her baby, an obsession that had consumed her final year at MIT. She'd been working on a revolutionary data compression algorithm, one that didn't just shrink file sizes but learned and anticipated data patterns to achieve a level of efficiency that was at the time purely theoretical. She had called it a predictive neural compression model. She called it Synapse because it was designed to mimic the way the human brain prunes unimportant information and strengthens vital connections. She opened the journal. The pages were filled with complex equations, flowcharts, and lines of a programming language she had co-developed for the project. Her handwriting was a frantic, excited scrawl, the notes of a mind working faster than the pen could keep up. She remembered the sleepless nights fueled by coffee and ambition, the thrill of a breakthrough, the sheer unadulterated joy of creation. Richard had hated it. He was in his first year at Harvard Business School then, and he saw her project as a distraction. "Clara, it's a cute academic exercise," he'd said one evening, glancing at her wall of whiteboards covered in code. "But in the real world, people care about profits, not elegant little algorithms. You need to focus on networking, on making the right connections." She had defended her work fiercely then, but after they got married, his voice became the dominant one in her head. Her work was a hobby. Her ambition was unnecessary. His career was paramount. And so Synapse, along with her dreams, was packed away in a box and relegated to the attic. As she turned the pages, a wave of profound, gut-wrenching grief washed over her. It wasn't for Richard. It was for herself. For the brilliant, passionate young woman she had abandoned. Richard hadn't just taken her house and her money. He had, piece by piece, dismantled her very identity until all that was left was Mrs. Richard Sterling. She found a folded piece of paper tucked into the back cover of the journal. It was a formal-looking document, a licensing agreement. She vaguely remembered signing it. Her thesis advisor, a brilliant but eccentric professor named Dr. Eris Thorne, had urged her to. He had seen the immense potential in her work. "You can't just let this die in a library archive, Clara," he had insisted. "Let's put it out there even in a small way. A tiny tech incubator, a startup I know, they could use this as a foundational patent. It won't make you rich, but it will keep the idea alive." The agreement was with a company she barely remembered, Chrysalis Innovations. They had licensed the core algorithm for a nominal fee, something like $1,000, which had seemed like a fortune to her at the time. The terms were simple. They had the right to develop the technology, and she retained a small percentage of ownership in the foundational patent itself. She recalled Richard laughing at it. $1,000 for your magnum opus. See, I told you it was just a college game." She had believed him. She had filed the paperwork away and forgotten all about it. Now, sitting on the floor of her empty apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of her past, a new feeling began to push through the fog of despair. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was curiosity. A spark. What had ever happened to Chrysalis Innovations? To her algorithm? To Dr. Thorne? On a whim, driven by a need to connect with the person she used to be, she pulled out her laptop. The sleek silver machine was a gift from Richard meant for online shopping and managing social calendars. Now, for the first time in years, she was going to use it for something else. Her fingers felt clumsy on the keyboard as she typed Dr. Eris Thorne into the search bar. The results came up instantly. He was still at MIT now, the head of the Department of Artificial Intelligence and Computer Science. He was a luminary in the field, a celebrated pioneer. Her heart pounded in her chest. Would he even remember her, Clara Reed, his promising student from nearly 20 years ago? She scrolled through the department website until she found his official email address. Her hands shook as she composed a short, simple message. Subject A. Former student, Clara Reed, formerly Bellwether. Dear Dr. Thorne. You may not remember me, but I was a student of yours back in 2005. I've been going through some old things and came across my senior thesis, the Synapse Project. I was just feeling a bit nostalgic and wanted to reach out and thank you again for all your guidance and encouragement back then. It meant the world to me. I hope you are well. Sincerely, Clara Reed. She stared at the message for a long time, her finger hovering over the send button. It felt foolish, a desperate grasp at a past that no longer existed. Richard's voice echoed in her head, mocking her. What are you doing? Reliving your glory days. Pathetic. She clicked send anyway. It was a small act of rebellion, a tiny signal sent out into the universe from a life that had been put on hold. She didn't expect a reply. She certainly didn't expect that single email sent from a place of lonely nostalgia would be the catalyst that would set the entire world on fire. 3 days passed. The email to Dr. Thorne faded into the background noise of Clara's quiet despair. She assumed it had been lost in the digital ether, or worse, seen and ignored by a busy academic with no time for ghosts from his past. She began to regret sending it, feeling the familiar sting of foolishness that Richard had so expertly conditioned her to feel. On Friday afternoon, as she was listlessly stirring a pot of soup she had no intention of eating, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. The area code was for Cambridge, Massachusetts. Her heart skipped a beat. She almost didn't answer, her anxiety spiking, but some new defiant instinct made her press the green button. Hello, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Clara Bellwether. Is that you? My God, it's Heiress Thorne. The voice was exactly as she remembered, a booming, enthusiastic baritone crackling with intellectual energy. It was a voice from another lifetime. Dr. Thorne, she breathed, sinking onto a kitchen stool. I can't believe you called. I wasn't expecting. Expecting, Clara. Your email was like a flare in the night. I've tried to find you a half-dozen times over the years, but you seem to have dropped off the face of the earth. Reed, you said your name is Now. Of course you got married. How have you been? What have you been working on? Are you still in the field? The rapid-fire questions were overwhelming. How could she possibly answer? Well, I got married, gave up my entire career, was systematically stripped of my confidence, and just got divorced by the man who told me my life's work was a cute little game. How about you? It's a long story. She managed, her voice thick with emotion. I haven't been in the field for a while. I'm in a period of transition right now. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Dr. Thorne, ever perceptive, seemed to sense the weight behind her words. Ah, he said, his tone softening. Well, whatever you've been doing, I hope the world has been good to you. You had one of the most brilliant minds I ever had the privilege of teaching. The compliment, so genuine and unexpected, hit her like a physical blow. It was water on a desert, a nutrient she hadn't realized she was starving for. She had to swallow hard to keep from crying. You mentioned Synapse in your email, he continued, his voice regaining its excitement. Clara, you have no idea. You have no idea what you started. What do you mean? She asked, her curiosity piqued. I assumed it just fizzled out with that little incubator chrysalis. Dr. Thorne let out a booming laugh. Fizzled out, Clara, chrysalis. Innovations was acquired about 12 years ago by a mid-level data logistics company called Logicor. They were smart enough to know what they had, but not big enough to scale it. They spent a decade quietly refining your algorithm, building a massive framework around your predictive compression model. They used it to revolutionize supply chain management, creating a system that could predict market needs and reroute global shipping in real time. They renamed the core system Helios, but at its heart, it's still Synapse. It's your digital DNA. Clara felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. I had no idea. Of course you didn't. They've been running it in a closed system, a fiercely guarded trade secret. But secrets like that don't last forever. In the last year, a few major players have gotten wind of what Helios can do, and one of them, the biggest shark in the ocean, is circling. Who? Clara whispered, her grip on the phone tightening. Nexus Corp. The name landed with the force of an anvil. Nexus Corp wasn't just a tech company. It was a global behemoth. They were into everything: cloud computing, AI, e-commerce, space exploration. Their CEO, a man named Kalen Vance, was a household name, a modern-day Midas, whose touch turned everything to gold. Nexus wants to acquire Logicor. Dr. Thorne explained, his voice low and urgent. Not for their clients or their infrastructure. They want Helios. They want your algorithm. An acquisition of this magnitude involves intense due diligence. Lawyers started digging into Logicor's foundational patents, and they traced Helios all the way back to its source. To a senior thesis from MIT. To patent 7894561B2. To you, Clara. The room began to spin. Clara put a hand on the counter to steady herself. My patent. But that was just a small percentage. Clara, Dr. Thorne said, his voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial whisper. That small percentage was on the foundational patent. Everything Logicor built, every line of code in the Helios system, is legally considered a derivative work. Your little slice of the pie isn't a slice of the original $1,000 seed. It's a slice of the entire goddamn tree. Logicor's lawyers have been trying to reach you for 6 months. The letters were likely going to your old address, the one I didn't have. My old address, Clara stammered, thinking of the Greenwich house. Richard probably saw the letters, marked them as junk mail from some obscure tech company, and had them incinerated without a second thought. The irony was so thick she could barely breathe. What does this mean? She asked, her mind struggling to process the flood of information. It means Nexus Corp can't complete the acquisition without the original patent holder signing off. It means, Clara, that you are the linchpin in a multi-billion-dollar deal. Your signature is the final key. The soup on the stove began to boil over, hissing as it hit the hot burner, but Clara didn't notice. The sterile apartment, the city noise, her own despair, it all faded away. All she could hear was the frantic, triumphant pounding of her own heart. They're having a preliminary meeting in New York next week, Dr. Thorne continued. The CEO of Logicor, Robert Chen, and the head of acquisitions from Nexus, a real killer named Cassandra Hayes. Robert's lawyers finally tracked me down, hoping I knew how to find you. Clara, you need to be in that room, but you cannot go in alone. These people eat people like us for breakfast. A vision of Richard flashed in her mind, sitting across the mahogany table smirking. What marketable skills do you possess? A slow, dangerous smile spread across Clara's face. It was the first genuine smile in months. Dr. Thorne, she said, her voice no longer trembling but infused with a steel she hadn't felt in years. Can you send me everything you have on this, every document, every email? And I know just the lawyer to bring. She ended the call and immediately dialed Izzy. Izzy, she said the moment her friend picked up. Cancel your plans for the next 2 weeks. We're going to war. The week that followed was a whirlwind, a trial by fire that forged a new Clara Reed from the ashes of the old. The quiet, sterile apartment transformed into a bustling war room. Izzy, upon hearing the full story, had reacted with a stunned silence, followed by a string of curses, and then a whoop of fierce, unadulterated joy. She moved in, practically turning the minimalist living room into a command center littered with documents, laptops, and takeout containers. Dr. Thorne, true to his word, had overnighted a package containing every piece of correspondence and technical analysis he had. Clara and Izzy spent 2 straight days devouring the information. For Clara, it was like waking a dormant part of her brain. Reading through the technical specs of the Helios system, she saw the ghost of her original Synapse algorithm everywhere. They had scaled it, polished it, and wrapped it in a $1 trillion shell, but the core logic, her logic, was unmistakable. The girl who once filled whiteboards with frantic code was reawakening, her mind firing on all cylinders. They've expanded the predictive matrix, she muttered one evening, pointing at a complex flowchart. But the core heuristic is still mine. See the way it prunes low-probability data strings. That's my signature." Izzy, while not understanding the technical nuances, understood the legal implications perfectly. "Your signature is about to be worth more than the GDP of a small country," she said, her eyes gleaming. "This is beautiful, Clara. Absolutely beautiful. The premarital asset clause in your divorce settlement is our fortress." Richard defined anything from before the marriage as separate property. He was so eager to protect his own meager premarital savings that he inadvertently built a legal wall around your billion-dollar baby. They hired a team of the best patent and M&A lawyers in the country, a firm Izzy had long admired, Cohen, Stern and Associates. The initial consultation was a revelation. When Clara, quiet and unassuming, began to deconstruct the Helios system for the senior partner, a legendary litigator named Samuel Stern, the man's eyebrows rose higher and higher. "Ms. Reed," he said after she had finished, a look of profound respect on his face, "you're not just the patent holder. You understand this technology better than the people who have been developing it for the last decade. This changes the entire negotiation." The power dynamic in the room had shifted. Clara wasn't just a victim with a lucky lottery ticket. She was an expert, an asset. Her voice, once hesitant, grew stronger with every meeting. She was no longer just Mrs. Richard Sterling. She was Clara Reed, the architect of Synapse. While Clara was rediscovering her intellectual power, she was also undergoing a physical transformation. Izzy insisted on it. "We're not walking into that boardroom looking like a victim," she declared, dragging Clara out of the apartment. "We are walking in there looking like the two women who own the place." They went to Bergdorf Goodman, not with Richard's money, but with a line of credit Izzy secured against the future settlement. Clara, who had spent 15 years dressing in the tasteful, conservative country club chic that Richard approved of, found herself being zipped into a sharp slate-gray Armani power suit. It fit her perfectly, the clean lines and structured shoulders making her stand taller. She looked at her reflection in the three-way mirror and saw a stranger, a confident, formidable woman she barely recognized. They bought 3 more outfits just like it, a uniform for her new life. A trip to a top salon followed, where her sensible shoulder-length hair was cut into a chic razor-sharp bob that framed her face and highlighted the intelligence in her eyes. The change wasn't just aesthetic, it was psychological. With each piece of her old life she shed, she felt lighter, stronger. The generous $10,000 stipend from Richard arrived in her bank account, and for the first time she laughed at it. It was a joke, a pittance from a man who had no idea what was coming. Meanwhile, Richard Sterling was living his best life, and he wanted the world to know it. His Instagram was a curated gallery of his success. A picture of him and Tiffany on a yacht in St. Bart's, her arm draped around him, a massive diamond on her finger. A shot of his new McLaren gleaming in the driveway of the Greenwich house. The captions were nauseatingly smug, starting a new chapter with "the one who truly gets me." Leveling up in every way. Izzy showed Clara one of the posts. "Look at this clown," she scoffed. Clara looked at the photo of Richard, his face tanned, his smile wide and self-satisfied. A few weeks ago it would have sent a spear of pain through her heart. Now she felt nothing but a distant clinical pity. He was a man trapped in a gilded cage of his own making, chasing validation through material things. He was playing checkers while she was about to overturn the entire chessboard. The day of the meeting arrived. It was a crisp, clear morning. Clara stood before the mirror in her new apartment, dressed in her Armani armor. She looked at her reflection, at the sharp haircut, the determined set of her jaw. The woman staring back at her was not the weeping, broken person from the Blackwood and Finch conference room. This was someone new, someone forged. Izzy stood beside her, adjusting her own blazer. "Ready?" Clara took a deep breath. "Richard once told me my greatest skill was choosing the right wine for a dinner party." "Well," Izzy said with a grin, "today you're not choosing the wine. You're buying the whole damn vineyard." They walked out of the apartment and into a waiting town car. Their destination, the gleaming obsidian tower in Midtown that housed the New York offices of Nexus Corp. As the car slid through the city traffic, Clara looked out at the canyons of steel and glass. For the first time since the divorce, the city didn't feel hostile or alien. It felt like a kingdom waiting to be conquered. She was no longer a ghost haunting someone else's life. She was an architect about to draw the blueprints for her own. The Nexus Corp boardroom was designed to intimidate. Located on the 80th floor, it offered a panoramic, godlike view of Manhattan. The table was a single massive slab of polished black granite that seemed to absorb all light and sound. At one end sat Robert Chen, the CEO of Logicor, a man in his late 60s with tired, anxious eyes. He was flanked by his legal team, who looked equally nervous. At the other end, holding court, was Cassandra Hayes, Nexus Corp's legendary head of mergers and acquisitions. She was a woman in her 40s with piercing gray eyes and an aura of absolute control. Her reputation preceded her. They called her the Shark for her ability to smell blood in the water from miles away. When Clara Izzy and Samuel Stern walked in, a ripple of confusion went through the room. They were expecting a meeting between Logicor and Nexus. They weren't expecting a third party. Cassandra Robert. Samuel Stern said, his voice calm and authoritative. Thank you for accommodating us. This is Clara Reed, the principal stakeholder in the foundational patent for the Helios system, and this is her personal counsel, Isabella Rossi. We're here to ensure Miss Reed's interests are properly represented in this transaction. Cassandra Hayes's perfectly plucked eyebrow rose a fraction of an inch. Robert Chen looked as if he'd just seen a ghost. He had clearly hoped to finalize the deal before Clara could be found and properly represented. Ms. Reed, Cassandra said, her voice like silk draped over steel. A surprise, but a welcome one. We at Nexus believe in dealing with all principals directly. She gestured to the empty chairs in the middle of the table. Please. The negotiation began. Cassandra opened with Nexus's initial offer to acquire Logicor, a staggering $900 million. Robert Chen looked ready to weep with gratitude and accept on the spot. Then Samuel Stern cleared his throat. A generous opening offer, Ms. Hayes. However, it seems to be based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the asset you are acquiring. Cassandra's eyes narrowed. Oh, and what might that be? You're not acquiring a logistics company, Stern said smoothly. The company is irrelevant. You are acquiring a piece of technology, a revolutionary AI that will become the central nervous system of your entire global operation. You're not buying a car, you're buying the patent for the internal combustion engine. And my client, Ms. Reed, holds the original title. The air in the room grew thick. This was the opening salvo. For the next 3 hours they battled. Cassandra's team tried to downplay the significance of Clara's patent, calling it an academic precursor. That's when Clara spoke for the first time. It's more than a precursor, Ms. Hayes, she said, her voice clear and steady. It's the heart, your own internal analysis. She slid a document across the table that Dr. Thorne had provided, an internal Nexus memo he'd acquired through academic channels. Projects that integrating Helios will increase your operational efficiency by a minimum of 40% within 3 years. That translates to an estimated profit increase of over $20 billion in the first decade alone. Cassandra Hayes was silent. Clara had just demonstrated not only that she knew the value of her technology, but that she also had access to Nexus's own confidential projections. The Shark was momentarily stunned. Clara pressed her advantage. She began to speak about Synapse, about Helios. She didn't talk about money or percentages. She talked about the code. She explained the elegance of its design, the foresight of its predictive modeling. She pointed out vulnerabilities in the current iteration and proposed solutions outlining next-generation capabilities that even Nexus's engineers hadn't considered. She wasn't a plaintiff asking for money. She was a creator explaining the value of her art. The dynamic in the room shifted irrevocably. Robert Chen and his lawyers faded into the background. This was no longer about Logicor. It was a direct negotiation between the creator Clara and the acquirer Cassandra. Cassandra Hayes, a woman who respected only strength and intelligence, was looking at Clara with a newfound grudging admiration. "What do you want, Ms. Reed?" Cassandra finally asked, cutting to the chase. Izzy leaned forward. "We are not seeking a percentage of the Logicor sale," she said crisply. "We are proposing a separate direct acquisition of Patent 7,894,561B2 and all its derivative intellectual properties. Ms. Reed will sell her stake directly to Nexus Corp. Logicor can then be acquired as a separate clean transaction." This was the masterstroke. It separated Clara's asset from the lesser company that had housed it. It made her a principal, not a passenger. Samuel Stern named their price, a number so large it seemed to hang in the air, visible and shimmering. The Nexus team balked. Cassandra Hayes claimed it was impossible. But no one left the room. For another 2 hours they hammered out the details. Numbers flew back and forth. Clauses were rewritten. The tension was immense. Finally, Cassandra Hayes stood up and extended a hand across the table to Clara. "Ms. Reed," she said, a thin smile on her lips, "it seems we have a deal." The final number they agreed upon was $1.2 billion. The signing of the documents was an almost surreal experience. Clara's hand was steady as she signed the papers that would irrevocably change her life. There was no elation, just a profound, quiet sense of vindication. The wire transfer was to be initiated within 24 hours. The next afternoon, Clara was in her apartment with Izzy. They were drinking tea, the adrenaline of the previous day having worn off, leaving them in a state of exhausted anticipation. Clara had her laptop open to her online banking portal. The balance read $4,872.14. At 3:15 p.m., she hit refresh. The screen flickered. For a heart-stopping second, the page was blank. And then the numbers appeared. $1,200.04,872.14. A tsunami of zeros. A number so vast it seemed fictional. Clara stared at the screen, her mind unable to fully comprehend the reality of what she was seeing. Izzy peered over her shoulder and her jaw dropped. "My God, Clara," she whispered. Clara didn't cheer. She didn't scream. A single tear, the twin of the one Richard had mocked, slid down her cheek. But this one was different. It wasn't born of pain or humiliation. It was a tear of release, of disbelief, of the sheer overwhelming weight of her own vindicated worth. She closed the laptop. The money was just a number on a screen. The real prize was the woman she had become to get it. The girl who loved to code, and the woman who had just conquered a titan, had finally merged into one. Her phone buzzed. It was a news alert from the Wall Street Journal. Tech giant Nexus Corp acquires key AI patent from obscure engineer in deal valued at over $1.2 billion. The patent foundational to logistics AI was authored by a previously unknown Clara Reed. The story was out. The world would know her name. And she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that somewhere in Greenwich, Richard Sterling was about to read the headline. The reckoning was coming. Richard Sterling was having an excellent day. He had just closed a lucrative deal, and he was celebrating with Tiffany at Le Ciel, a ridiculously exclusive rooftop restaurant where the entrees cost more than most people's car payments. He felt on top of the world, the master of his universe. Tiffany was snapping a selfie of them, the city skyline sparkling behind them. Hashtag power couple, she purred, tapping away at her phone. Hashtag winning. Richard chuckled, sipping his vintage Bordeaux. He was indeed winning. He had shed his boring, unambitious wife and upgraded to a newer, more exciting model. He had his freedom, his fortune, and his status. Life was perfect. His phone vibrated on the table. A notification from his financial news app. He glanced at it, annoyed at the interruption. The headline made him stop breathing. Nexus Corp acquires key AI patent from a previously unknown Clara Reed. Deal valued at over $1.2 billion. The name had to be a coincidence. It had to be. There were other Clara Reeds in the world. His Clara Reed, the woman whose greatest ambition was perfecting her lasagna recipe, couldn't possibly be involved in a billion-dollar tech deal. It was absurd. He clicked the link, his heart beginning to hammer against his ribs. The article loaded. And there it was. A picture of her. It was an old photo from a charity event years ago, but it was unmistakably her. The story detailed the origins of the patent and MIT thesis project from over 15 years ago. Synapse. The name hit him like a physical blow. He remembered the name. He remembered mocking it. It's a cute academic exercise, Clara. $1,000 for your magnum opus. What marketable skills do you possess? The wine glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the pristine white tablecloth, splashing red like blood. Tiffany shrieked in annoyance. "Richard! This is couture! You ruined my dress!" He didn't hear her. He was reading the number again and again. $1,200, $1,000, $1,000. It was a number that broke his brain. It was more money than he, with all his deals and bluster, could ever dream of making. And it belonged to Clara. The smug satisfaction drained from him, replaced by a frantic, clawing panic. Their divorce settlement. The ironclad premarital asset clause he had insisted on. The patent was from before their marriage. It was hers. All of it. No. He whispered, his face ashen. No, no, no. This wasn't just about the money. It was about the narrative. He was the winner. She was the loser. He was the success. She was the charity case. This flipped the entire script. He was the fool. He had mocked her tears as she signed away her life, completely oblivious to the fact that she was sitting on a treasure chest that could buy and sell his entire existence 100 times over. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking so violently he could barely dial her number. He had to talk to her. He had to fix this. It was community property. He had supported her. He was entitled to half. He had to be. The phone rang and rang, then went to voicemail. Her voice, calm and professional, no longer the warm, familiar tone he remembered instructed him to leave a message. He hung up and tried again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. He flew into a rage, shoving his chair back and storming away from the table, leaving a bewildered Tiffany behind. He drove like a madman back to the Greenwich house, his mind racing. He called his lawyer, Arthur Vance. "She hid this from me," he screamed into the phone. "She committed fraud. This was a marital asset. We have to reopen the divorce." Arthur's voice was cold and clinical. "Richard, was the patent filed before your wedding date?" "Yes, but—" "Did she ever receive income from it during the marriage that was deposited into a joint account?" "No, of course not. It was worthless." Richard yelled the words, tasting like acid in his mouth. "Then you have no claim," Arthur stated flatly. "You yourself insisted on a rigid definition of premarital property. By your own legal strategy, it is entirely hers. Trying to fight this would be career suicide. You'd be a laughingstock." Richard slammed the phone down, the reality of his monumental error crashing down on him. He had been outmaneuvered by the one person on earth he had considered his intellectual inferior. He drove to Clara's city apartment, his last desperate gambit. He would appeal to their history, their children, their shared life. He would beg if he had to. He buzzed the intercom, his heart pounding. After a long moment, a voice came through, not Clara's, but Izzy's. "Yes. Izzy, it's Richard. I need to speak to Clara. It's an emergency." "I'm sorry, Richard, but she has nothing to say to you." The intercom clicked off. He buzzed again frantically. "Please, just let me talk to her." The line opened again. This time it was Clara's voice. It was as calm and cool as a frozen lake. "Richard," she said, "what do you want?" "Clara, thank God!" He gasped, relief washing over him. "We need to talk. This money. This is our money. It's for the family. It's for the kids' futures. It's half mine. You know that's only fair." There was a long silence on the other end. He could picture her standing there in that apartment he had so magnanimously given her. "Fair," she finally said, and the word was laced with ice. "Let's talk about fair, Richard. Was it fair when you told me my life's work was a cute little game? Was it fair when you had an affair with your lawyer's niece and flaunted it for the world to see? Was it fair when you sat in that conference room and told me I had no marketable skills, that I was worth nothing more than a 2-year allowance?" Each question was a stab, and he had no defense. "Clara, I was an idiot. I was stressed. I didn't mean it," he stammered, his voice cracking. "I love you. I always have. We can fix this. We can get back together. Think of our history." A soft, mirthless laugh came through the speaker. It was the most terrifying sound he had ever heard. "Our history is that you mocked my tears, Richard," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, each word precisely enunciated. "You stood on my neck and called it a victory. This isn't our money. It is my money. It was earned with my mind, a mind you did everything in your power to convince me was worthless. You are entitled to nothing. You defined the terms of our separation. Now you can live with them." She paused for a moment, letting the finality of her words sink in. "And Richard," she added, her voice devoid of all emotion, "do try to be smart with that money you have left. It's a lot less than you'll ever see again." The click of the intercom shutting off was the sound of the gates of the kingdom slamming shut in his face. He was left standing on the pavement, a beggar looking up at the castle he had once owned and foolishly thrown away. He had mocked her tears, and now those tears had watered the seeds of an empire, while he was left with nothing but the dust of his own arrogance. The news of Clara's newfound wealth and Richard's spectacular fall from grace became the stuff of Wall Street legend. He was a cautionary tale, a meme, the man who had traded a billion-dollar diamond for a rhinestone. His carefully constructed world crumbled with astonishing speed. His business partners, smelling the stench of his monumental misjudgment, began to distance themselves. His fair-weather friends vanished. Tiffany, upon realizing that her power couple hashtag now applied to a man who had fumbled the biggest fortune in modern history, quietly packed her designer bags and disappeared from his life, leaving nothing but a faint trace of expensive perfume in the Greenwich house. Richard was forced to sell the house, the ski lodge, the art, all to cover the debts from a lifestyle he could no longer afford. He became a ghost, a hollowed-out man haunted by the echoes of his own mockery. But this story was never truly about Richard's downfall. It was about Clara's ascent. Clara did not retreat into a life of idle luxury. The money, as staggering as it was never the point. It was the tool. It was the validation that had unlocked the final shackles on her potential. She was no longer defined by a man, a marriage, or a divorce settlement. She was defined by her own intellect and ambition. Her first major act was not to buy a yacht or a private island, but to establish a foundation. She called it the Synapse Initiative. Its mission was simple and revolutionary: to fund and mentor women and girls in STEM fields. She bought a sleek modern office building in the heart of the city, not far from the Blackwood and Finch Tower, and it became her new headquarters. The Synapse Initiative wasn't just about cutting checks. Clara was deeply personally involved. She lectured at universities, including her alma mater, MIT, inspiring a new generation of female engineers and coders. She created a venture capital arm of the foundation specifically to invest in tech startups founded by women, providing the capital and support that was so often denied to them by the male-dominated world of finance. She remembered her own experience, her brilliant idea dismissed as a cute game, and vowed that no woman with a groundbreaking idea would ever hear those words again if she could help it. She poured millions into revitalizing science and math programs in underprivileged public schools, building state-of-the-art computer labs, and funding scholarships for promising young minds who would have otherwise been left behind. She became a quiet force of nature, a philanthropist whose work wasn't about photo ops and galas, but about creating tangible, lasting change. The media clamored for interviews, but she rarely gave them. She let her work speak for itself. Her personal life also blossomed, but not in the way the gossip columns predicted. She didn't rush into the arms of a new powerful man. She had friendships, but her primary relationship was with herself and her work. She traveled the world not to lie on beaches, but to see new technologies, to meet with innovators, to expand her understanding of the world she was now helping to shape. She took Izzy with her on many of these trips, their friendship forged in the fires of the divorce, now the bedrock of her new life. One crisp autumn afternoon about a year after the Nexus deal, Clara stood on a construction site. She was wearing a hard hat over her chic bob, a blueprint spread out on the hood of a car. It was the future home of the Reed Center for Innovation, a massive campus that would serve as an incubator research facility and educational center, all under the umbrella of the Synapse Initiative. She looked at the steel skeleton of the building rising against the blue sky, a tangible symbol of the future she was building. It was a future built not on Richard's money or his approval, but on her own terms from the fruits of her own mind. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from one of the first recipients of a Synapse scholarship, a brilliant young woman from the Bronx who had just won a prestigious coding competition. The message was simple. "Thank you for believing in me, Ms. Reed. You changed my life." Clara smiled a genuine, radiant smile of pure contentment. Richard had mocked her for a single tear of pain. He had tried to reduce her to a balance sheet, to a dependent to nothing. But he had failed, because he could never understand that her true worth wasn't a number in a bank account. It was in the elegant lines of code she wrote, in the passion she had rediscovered, and in the countless lives she would now lift up with her own. She was no longer just a wife or an ex-wife. She was Clara Reed, and she was just getting started. Clara's journey wasn't a fairy tale of revenge. It was a powerful testament to the rediscovery of self-worth. She transformed the deepest betrayal into her greatest liberation. Her story proves that your value is never determined by someone else's opinion, and that the skills and passions you may have set aside are not lost, but merely waiting for the right moment to ignite and reshape your world. The billion-dollar bank account was just a side effect. Her real triumph was reclaiming her own brilliant mind and using it to build a legacy far greater than any man could tear down. She didn't just get rich. She got free. If her incredible story of transformation from tears to titan moved you, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable stories of resilience and vindication. Click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching. The sting of betrayal isn't a single event. It's a lingering poison. For Olivia Adler, that poison was administered in a ballroom filled with crystal chandeliers and 100 smiling assassins. Her ex-husband Preston, a man she'd sacrificed everything for, stood with his arm draped around his new fiancée, a woman whose success was built on the ashes of their marriage. He raised a glass, his voice echoing through the microphone, toasting a future she was never meant to have. In that moment, broken and invisible, Olivia had no idea that a forgotten past and an unimaginable fortune were about to collide, turning her world and theirs upside down forever. The annual Sterling Foundation Charity Gala was the glittering pinnacle of the city's social calendar, a place where fortunes were pledged and reputations were cemented. For Olivia Adler, it was the seventh circle of hell, and she was walking into the fire with her eyes wide open. Her boss at the small architectural firm, Mr. Henderson, had insisted the entire team attend. "It's about networking, Olivia," he'd said, oblivious to the personal horror the event represented. 2 years ago, she had walked into this very ballroom on the arm of her then-husband, Preston Montgomery. He was a rising star in private equity, sharp-suited and sharper-witted, with an ambition that burned like a furnace. Olivia, a talented but unassuming architectural drafter, had been his steadfast support system. She'd worked extra hours to help him through his MBA, proofread his proposals until her eyes blurred, and put her own career ambitions on the back burner, believing they were building a shared future. That future had shattered 6 months ago. The divorce was swift and brutal. The reason had a name: Brenda Finch. Brenda was a vice president at a rival firm, a woman who moved through the world with the predatory grace of a panther. Preston hadn't just left Olivia. He had upgraded, as he'd once drunkenly implied to a mutual friend. He had traded in a reliable sedan for a high-performance sports car, and tonight they were being celebrated. Preston's firm was a major sponsor of the gala, and he was slated to give a keynote address. Olivia clutched her small, worn handbag, feeling profoundly out of place in her simple, off-the-rack navy dress. All around her were women in designer gowns and jewelry that cost more than her annual salary. She tried to busy herself by the silent auction tables, pretending to study a signed piece of sports memorabilia, when a familiar, dreaded voice cut through the air. "Well, look what the cat dragged in." Olivia's spine stiffened. She turned to see Preston looking insufferably handsome in a custom tuxedo. Beside him, Brenda Finch was a vision in blood-red silk, a massive diamond engagement ring flashing on her finger like a weapon. Olivia said, her voice tight. "Brenda, I'm surprised to see you here, Olivia." Brenda said, her smile a perfect painted slash. "I didn't think this was really your scene." The implication was clear. "You don't belong." "My firm has a table," Olivia replied, forcing a polite neutrality she didn't feel. Preston smirked, that familiar condescending tilt of his lips that she now realized was not confidence but pure arrogance. "That's nice. Good for Henderson's little operation. Still drafting blueprints for suburban kitchen remodels." The jab landed precisely where it was intended. Olivia's dream had always been to design sustainable, innovative public spaces, but her current job was creatively stifling a necessity to pay the bills for the cramped apartment she now lived in. "It pays the rent," she said, her cheeks flushing. "I'm sure it does," Preston said, then turned his full attention to Brenda, pulling her closer. "Did you know darling Olivia was the one who encouraged me to get into leveraged buyouts? She used to stay up all night reading financial textbooks with me. A real cheerleader." He said the word cheerleader with a dismissive tone, as if it were a quaint, pathetic hobby. Brenda laughed, a light tinkling sound that grated on Olivia's nerves. "How sweet. It's a good thing you found a partner who can play on the field with you, not just watch from the sidelines." The cruelty was breathtaking. Every word was designed to remind Olivia of what she had contributed and what she had lost. She felt the eyes of people nearby turning towards them, sensing the drama. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of her own making. She had to get away. "If you'll excuse me," she mumbled, turning to leave. But Preston wasn't finished. He held up a hand. "Oh, stay for a moment. They're about to introduce me. You should hear the speech. I even give a little nod to the people who helped me get here." His eyes gleamed with malice. He was promising one final public humiliation. As if on cue, the master of ceremonies took the stage. Olivia was frozen, trapped in the orbit of their toxic success. A few minutes later, after a glowing introduction, Preston stood at the podium, bathed in a spotlight. He was charming, witty, and confident. He spoke of ambition and vision, of seizing opportunities. And of course, he said, his eyes scanning the crowd and deliberately landing on Olivia, "For a fraction of a second, I wouldn't be here without the support of people who believed in me, even when my vision surpassed their own understanding. And most importantly, I stand here today because I found a true partner, a woman whose brilliance and drive match my own. To my fiancée, Brenda." The room erupted in applause. Brenda blew him a kiss. The spotlight found her, and she basked in it. It was a perfectly crafted narrative, positioning Olivia as the simple, small-minded first wife who couldn't keep up the necessary but ultimately disposable booster rocket for his ascent to the stars. Olivia felt a wave of nausea. She stumbled back away from the crowd, her vision blurring with unshed tears. She pushed through a set of double doors and found herself on a cold, deserted balcony overlooking the city. The glittering lights of the skyline mocked her. She had given that man the best years of her life, her energy, her dreams. In return, he had erased her from his story, recasting her as a footnote in his grand epic. Leaning against the cold stone balustrade with the sounds of his triumph echoing behind her, Olivia Adler felt a profound and terrifying emptiness. She wasn't just heartbroken, she was utterly and completely erased. The weeks following the gala bled into a monotonous gray. Olivia's life settled into a rhythm of quiet desperation. Wake up in the too-small apartment that smelled faintly of her predecessor's cat. Endure the long commute on a crowded train. Spend 8 hours drafting uninspired designs under the fluorescent hum of her office. Commute home. Eat a microwave dinner for one. Sleep. Repeat. The vibrant colors of her life with Preston had been replaced with a stark, unforgiving monochrome. She actively avoided any news of him and Brenda, unsubscribing from business journals and muting mutual acquaintances on social media. Yet their success seemed to seep through the cracks of her carefully constructed defenses, a headline on a newsstand, a snippet of conversation from the cubicle next to hers. Each mention was a fresh twist of the knife. Her only refuge was her weekly dinner with her best friend Jessica Chen, a sharp-witted journalist who had seen Olivia through the worst of the divorce. "You need to get angry, Liv," Jessica said one evening, stabbing a piece of kung pao chicken with unnecessary force. "Grief is a phase. Right now, you're just letting him live rent-free in your head while he's redecorating his penthouse with that she-devil." "I'm not sad anymore," Olivia lied, pushing a stray noodle around her plate. "I'm just tired." "That's the same thing, just with better PR." Jessica shot back. "You gave him everything. You deserve to be furious." But Olivia couldn't summon the energy for fury. All she felt was a hollow ache, a sense of worthlessness that Preston had so expertly instilled in her. It was on a particularly bleak Tuesday, with rain lashing against her apartment window, that it arrived. Tucked between a credit card offer and a utility bill was a thick cream-colored envelope. It felt heavy, important. The return address was not a name but a crest, an embossed emblem of a stylized bee intertwined with an oak tree. Beneath it were the words Davies and Associates Attorneys at Law, Beaumont Tower, Geneva, Switzerland. Olivia stared at it bewildered. She knew no one in Switzerland. She had no business with any high-powered law firm. Her first thought was that it was a mistake. Her second, more cynical thought was that it was some kind of elaborate scam. Perhaps Preston had sold her information to mailing lists, and this was the bizarre result. She almost threw it away, but something about the quality of the paper, the crispness of the type, made her hesitate. With a sense of weary curiosity, she sliced it open with a kitchen knife. The letter inside was printed on the same heavy stock. The language was formal, almost archaic. Dear Ms. Adler, this correspondence concerns a matter of the utmost urgency and confidentiality pertaining to the estate of our late client, Mr. Jonathan Beaumont. We have made numerous attempts to locate you and believe with a high degree of certainty that you are the sole surviving heir we have been searching for. It is imperative that you contact our senior partner, Mr. Alistair Davies, at your earliest possible convenience to arrange a meeting. We understand this news may be unexpected. Please be assured of the legitimacy of this communication. A prepaid first-class airline ticket for travel to Geneva has been arranged on your behalf, details of which can be accessed via the enclosed secure reference number. We await your prompt response. Sincerely, Alistair Davies, Senior Partner, Davies and Associates. Olivia read it once, then twice. Jonathan Beaumont. The name meant nothing to her. Sole surviving heir. It had to be a joke. Her family history was painfully simple. Her father, a kind but perpetually struggling artist, had died when she was a teenager. Her mother had passed away from an illness 5 years before that. Both were orphans with no known relatives. She was, as far as she knew, completely alone in the world. This letter felt like something out of a Victorian novel, not a Tuesday in her drab city life. A prepaid ticket to Geneva. The whole thing screamed scam. They'd probably ask for her bank details to process the inheritance, and then drain her meager savings account. She tossed the letter onto her small kitchen counter next to a stack of unpaid bills. For the rest of the evening she tried to ignore it, but it sat there, a creamy rectangle of impossibility, drawing her eye. Who was Jonathan Beaumont? Why would a Swiss law firm be searching for her? The next day she brought the letter to dinner with Jessica. Her friend, a natural skeptic thanks to her profession, read it with a focused intensity. Olivia expected her to laugh it off to confirm her suspicions of a scam. Instead, Jessica folded the letter carefully and placed it on the table. "Liv, this is real." "What?" "No, it's not." "It's crazy," Olivia said. "Look at the letterhead," Jessica said, pointing. "The watermarked paper, the embossed seal. This is bespoke stationery that costs a fortune. Scammers use photocopies and fake email addresses. They don't use letterpress and couriers. But the name, Beaumont, it doesn't mean anything to me." "Did your mother ever talk about her family?" Jessica asked gently. Olivia shook her head. "No, never. She always said she was alone, that her parents died when she was very young. It was a sensitive subject. I learned not to ask." Jessica's journalistic instincts were firing on all cylinders. "Okay, let's think about this. A reclusive, wealthy client. A search for a long-lost heir. A mother with a mysterious past. This isn't a scam, Liv. This is a story." She pulled out her phone. Davies and Associates, Geneva. A few seconds of furious typing and she turned the screen to Olivia. The law firm was not just real. It was one of the most prestigious and discreet private wealth management firms in the world. Their client list was rumored to include old European royalty and tech billionaires. Beaumont Tower was a real gleaming skyscraper on the shores of Lake Geneva. "And look at this," Jessica said, her eyes wide as she scrolled through a series of older financial articles. Jonathan Beaumont. He was a legend. An industrialist and investor. Hugely powerful in the 70s and 80s. Became a complete recluse about 30 years ago. Nicknamed the Phantom of the Alps. He was notoriously private. No one has seen a photo of him in decades. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture so outlandish that Olivia could hardly comprehend it. A reclusive billionaire, a mother who never spoke of her past. A life of quiet struggle. Could they all be connected? What if... Olivia started, her voice barely a whisper. "What if my mother ran away? What if she was disowned for marrying your father, a poor artist?" Jessica finished, her voice full of awe. "Liv, this is life-changing. You have to call them. You have to go to Geneva." The thought was terrifying. It meant stepping out of the gray, predictable world she knew into a complete unknown. It meant entertaining a hope so wild it felt dangerous. Hope was a commodity she couldn't afford right now. Failure to manage expectations was what had led her to Preston, and she wouldn't make that mistake again. But as she looked at the letter, at the powerful, confident crest of the oak tree, a tiny, forgotten spark of defiance flickered within her. Preston and Brenda had tried to make her feel small, worthless, like a footnote in their story. What if she wasn't a footnote? What if she was the whole damn story? Taking a deep, shaky breath, Olivia Adler made a decision. She was going to Geneva. The flight to Geneva was a surreal experience. Olivia, who had only ever flown economy for a single vacation to Mexico, was now seated in a first-class cabin that was larger than her bedroom. She was served champagne she couldn't pronounce and food on actual porcelain. It felt like a dream. She was afraid to wake up from a fleeting taste of a life that couldn't possibly be hers. With every mile that passed, the absurdity of her situation grew. She was a drafter from a no-name firm flying to meet with legendary lawyers about a billionaire she'd never heard of. It was madness. Geneva was pristine, an oil painting of old-world elegance and modern precision. A silent driver holding a sign with her name met her at the airport and whisked her away in a sleek black sedan. They drove along the edge of the lake past luxury watch boutiques and private banks before pulling up to Beaumont Tower. It was a monument of steel and glass that pierced the clouds, a testament to immense power and wealth. Her heart pounded in her chest as she rode the silent high-speed elevator to the penthouse floor, which housed the exclusive offices of Davies and Associates. The reception area was less of an office and more of a private museum, with hushed carpets, dark wood paneling, and original modern art on the walls. A severe-looking woman led her to a pair of enormous oak doors. "Mr. Davies will see you now." Alistair Davies was an older gentleman impeccably dressed in a tailored suit with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through her. He rose from behind a desk the size of a small car and extended a hand. His office had a panoramic view of the lake and the jet dough. "Ms. Adler, thank you for coming on such short notice. I am Alistair Davies. Please have a seat." His English was perfect with a faint, unplaceable European accent. Olivia sat her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The simple navy blazer and slacks she'd thought were professional now felt hopelessly inadequate. "I assume you have many questions," Mr. Davies began, getting straight to the point. "You could say that," Olivia said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Your letter was a shock. I don't know anyone named Jonathan Beaumont." Mr. Davies slid a leather-bound folder across the polished desk. He opened it to the first page, which held a black-and-white photograph of a young smiling woman with familiar eyes. Olivia gasped. "That's my mother." "Indeed." "That is Elizabeth Beaumont, taken shortly before she left her home at the age of 19, Davies confirmed. "Your mother, Ms. Adler." He then proceeded to lay out the story, his tone calm and factual, as if he were explaining a corporate merger and not rewriting the entire history of her life. Jonathan Beaumont was her maternal grandfather. He was a brilliant but fiercely controlling man who had built a global empire from nothing. His only child, Elizabeth, was the light of his life, but he had a specific path laid out for her. A marriage to the son of another industrial titan, a life cementing the Beaumont dynasty. But Elizabeth had fallen in love with a young, penniless American art student, Olivia's father. When she told her father she intended to marry him, he had forbidden it. An explosive argument had ensued. Jonathan had given her an ultimatum: the man she loved or her family and fortune. Elizabeth, young and defiant, chose love. She left in the middle of the night with nothing but a small suitcase, severing all ties. She changed her last name to her husband's, moved to America, and never looked back, so determined to protect her new life from her father's influence that she erased her past completely. Your grandfather, Davies, continued, his expression softening slightly, was a man of immense pride. But his anger eventually faded, replaced by a profound regret. He began searching for your mother about 15 years ago. By the time our investigators found a trace of her, we learned that both she and your father had already passed away. The trail then led us to you. It has been a long and difficult search, Ms. Adler." Olivia felt a wave of dizziness. Her mother, who had clipped coupons and worked 2 jobs, was the heiress to a fortune? The narrative of her life, a simple story of love and loss, was a lie, or at least a heavily edited version. "My grandfather." "Your letter said he was your late client." Olivia said, the word catching in her throat. "Yes." "Mr. Beaumont passed away peacefully 2 months ago at the age of 94, Davies said. He spent his final years consumed with the need to right his past wrongs. He amended his will accordingly. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "Ms. Adler." "Olivia, Jonathan Beaumont left his entire estate to you." Olivia stared at him blankly. "His entire estate?" "That is correct. Beaumont Enterprises. His global portfolio of real estate, his art collection, his liquid assets. You are his sole heir." I don't understand." "How much are we talking about?" She asked the question, feeling foolish and small in the face of such a revelation. Mr. Davies didn't flinch. He slid another document towards her. It was a summary of assets. The numbers were so long they looked like telephone numbers. She saw the word billion repeated several times. Her eyes scanned the page, but her brain refused to process the figures. It was an astronomical sum, a fortune that could alter nations, let alone the life of a single heartbroken woman. She felt the room tilt. She wasn't just wealthy. She was one of the wealthiest women in the world. However, Mr. Davies said, his voice pulling her back from the brink of fainting, there is a condition. A rather significant one. Of course there was. It couldn't be that simple. Your grandfather, while determined to make you his heir, was also a pragmatist. He did not know you. He could not simply hand over control of a global corporation to a complete stranger, even if she was his blood. His will stipulates a probationary period. Probationary. For 1 year, you will assume a position on the board of Beaumont Enterprises. The company is currently managed by a very capable CEO and a board of directors, some of whom are other family members. Other family members, I thought I was the sole heir. Distant cousins, Davies clarified. Your grandfather's nephew and niece, Jeffrey and Camilla Beaumont. They have managed a subsidiary of the company for years and have long expected to inherit the bulk of the estate. They are displeased by this development. They will be watching you very closely. The trap was set. What do I have to do? Olivia asked. You have to learn, Davies said simply. You have to understand the business, prove your competence, and earn the respect of the board. At the end of the year, the board, including Jeffrey and Camilla, will vote on whether to ratify your position as the new chairwoman and grant you full, unequivocal control of the Beaumont Trust. If you fail to secure their confidence, what happens if I fail? Then the estate's assets will be liquidated and donated to a list of international charities selected by your grandfather. You would be left with a generous but comparatively small trust fund, enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life, but you would have no control over the Beaumont legacy. Olivia's mind was reeling. A year. She had 1 year to go from an architectural drafter to a corporate titan, all while being scrutinized by resentful relatives ready to see her fail. It was an impossible task. The old Olivia, the one who had walked into that gala 2 months ago, would have run screaming from the room. She would have taken the small trust fund and disappeared. But something had changed in her. The humiliation she had suffered at Preston's hands had burned away her naivete. It had left behind a core of hardened steel she didn't know she possessed. Preston had told her she was a cheerleader on the sidelines. Her grandfather, a man she'd never met, was giving her a chance to own the entire stadium. She looked out the window at the city below, at a world of power and influence she never dreamed she could be a part of. This wasn't just about money. It was about legacy. It was about proving to herself and to the ghosts of her past that she was more than what Preston had made her feel. She turned back to Mr. Davies, her expression no longer one of shock, but of quiet, unshakable resolve. When do I start? The transition from Olivia Adler, architectural drafter, to Olivia Adler, probationary board member of a multi-billion-dollar empire, was less of a gentle slope and more of a vertical cliff face. Mr. Davies became her Virgil, guiding her through the inferno of high finance. She moved out of her cramped apartment and into a sleek, minimalist penthouse suite at the top of a Beaumont-owned hotel, a temporary residence that came with a staff and a view that made the entire city look like a toy set. Her first few weeks were a relentless boot camp. Her days were filled with tutors. A retired economics professor from Cambridge taught her macroeconomics. A sharp, fast-talking Wall Street veteran taught her portfolio management and market analysis. A prim and proper etiquette coach taught her how to navigate the complex social codes of the ultra-wealthy. Her nights were spent poring over financial reports, corporate histories, and shareholder briefings until the words swam before her eyes. The sheer scale of Beaumont Enterprises was staggering. It wasn't one company. It was a hydra-headed conglomerate with interests in sustainable technology, pharmaceuticals, luxury real estate, and private equity. It was a global force, and she was expected to understand its every moving part. Her first board meeting was a trial by fire. She walked into the cavernous boardroom in Geneva, a room dominated by a table of polished obsidian, feeling like an imposter in her new custom-tailored business suit. The CEO, a capable and unflappable man named Robert Chen, greeted her with professional courtesy. The other board members, seasoned executives from around the world, watched her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. And then there were Jeffrey and Camilla Beaumont. Jeffrey was a portly man in his late 50s with a florid face and an air of perpetual entitlement. Camilla, his sister, was thin and severe, with eyes that missed nothing and a smile that never reached them. They represented the old guard, the family members who had been waiting in the wings for decades. The arrival of an unknown granddaughter from America was not just a surprise, it was an insult. Ms. Adler Jeffrey began, his voice oozing false cordiality as the meeting started. "A pleasure to finally meet you. We were all so shocked to learn of your existence. A delightful little family secret." Camilla added, "Indeed, I must confess we're all rather curious. What exactly is your background? My uncle's file on you was rather thin. Something in construction, was it?" She said the word construction as if it were something one might find on the bottom of a shoe. Olivia felt a flush of her old insecurity, but she met their condescending gazes head on. She had prepared for this with Mr. Davies. "My background is in architecture and design," Olivia said, her voice clear and calm. "I specialize in structural integrity and spatial efficiency. I find it's not so different from analyzing a company. You look for a solid foundation check for stress points and ensure the entire structure is designed for sustainable growth." The answer was unexpected, and a few of the other board members exchanged impressed glances. Jeffrey and Camilla merely looked annoyed. Throughout the meeting, they peppered her with pointed questions using jargon and acronyms designed to trip her up. But Olivia, thanks to her grueling weeks of study, was able to follow along, asking intelligent if basic questions. She didn't pretend to be an expert. She positioned herself as a dedicated student, which to her surprise earned her a measure of grudging respect from the non-family members of the board. After the meeting, Mr. Davies gave her a rare approving nod. "You held your own. They expected a frightened little girl. You did not give them one." But Olivia knew this was just the beginning. To truly prove herself, she needed to do more than just study. She needed to act. An opportunity soon presented itself, one that unexpectedly connected her new life with her old. Mr. Henderson, her old boss, called her in a panic. His small firm, Henderson & Associates, was the target of a hostile takeover. A mid-sized private equity firm, Montgomery Capital, was buying up their debt and trying to force a sale. The plan was to absorb their client list and then dissolve the company, leaving 24 employees jobless. The name hit Olivia like a physical blow. Montgomery Capital. It was Preston's firm, the firm she had helped him dream up. He was a piranha swallowing up smaller fish to fuel his own growth. Her old colleagues, the people she had worked with for years, were about to be casualties of his ambition. The old Olivia would have felt helpless. The new Olivia saw an opportunity. She spent 2 days with her finance tutors analyzing Henderson's company from every angle. It was small, but had a solid reputation. And more importantly, a new division focused on eco-friendly urban planning, an area Olivia was passionate about and knew was undervalued. Preston was only seeing the firm's current modest profits. He was blind to its future potential. She went to Mr. Davies. "I want to make my first move," she said. She laid out her proposal. She wouldn't use Beaumont Enterprises' name directly. Instead, she would use a small pre-existing Beaumont subsidiary, a venture capital fund specializing in green tech, to act. The plan was twofold. First, the fund would buy out all of Henderson & Associates' debt from the various creditors before Preston could consolidate it. Second, it would make a significant equity investment in the firm, giving it the capital to expand its sustainable design division and fight off any further takeover attempts. It was a strategic investment that aligned perfectly with the Beaumont portfolio, but it was also deeply personal. Mr. Davies listened intently, a poker face firmly in place. When she finished, he looked at her for a long moment. "This is clever and aggressive. You would be blocking your ex-husband's business deal." "It's not about him," Olivia said, and was surprised to find she meant it. "This is a good investment. The firm has potential that he's too short-sighted to see, and it protects the jobs of good people. It's a sound business decision that also happens to be the right thing to do. A corner of Mr. Davies' mouth twitched into something that might have been a smile. Your grandfather would have approved of the strategy. He would have been less concerned with the morality. He made a call. The next day the plan was set in motion. The transaction was swift and silent. One by one the debt holders sold to Olivia's subsidiary. Mr. Henderson was informed that a new benevolent investor had saved his company and was funding its future. He had no idea it was Olivia. Meanwhile, in another city, Preston Montgomery was likely fuming, his easy conquest having inexplicably vanished from his grasp. He wouldn't know who had outmaneuvered him, only that a more powerful unseen player had entered the game. Sitting in her penthouse looking over the city, Olivia felt a surge of power that had nothing to do with the money. It was the feeling of competence, the feeling of taking a broken situation and fixing it. She hadn't just learned the language of this new world, she was starting to speak it. And she was beginning to suspect that she was very, very good at it. The cheerleader had just bought the team. 3 months passed. Olivia immersed herself in her new role, traveling the globe to visit Beaumont's various holdings. She walked the floors of pharmaceutical labs in Germany, toured sustainable real estate developments in Singapore, and sat in on strategy sessions in New York. She was a sponge absorbing everything. Her confidence grew with her knowledge. She began to speak up more in board meetings, offering insights from her unique architectural perspective that the finance-brained executives had never considered. Camilla and Jeffrey continued their campaign of subtle condescension, but it was beginning to lose its sting. The other board members were starting to see her not as an interloper, but as an asset. The inevitable collision with her past happened in a glass-walled boardroom on the 50th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper. Beaumont Enterprises was in the final stages of acquiring a groundbreaking robotics startup called Synapse Dynamics. It was a major strategic move into AI, and Olivia had been a vocal champion of the deal. On the day the final papers were to be signed, however, a complication arose. A smaller, aggressive private equity firm had launched a last-minute long-shot competing bid, forcing a face-to-face meeting with Synapse's board. Olivia, along with Robert Chen, the CEO, and 2 of Beaumont's top lawyers, walked into the meeting room. The Synapse team was already seated, and on the other side of the table, representing the competing bidders, were 2 figures who made the blood freeze in her veins: Preston Montgomery and Brenda Finch. For a moment the world seemed to slow down. Olivia could hear the frantic beat of her own heart. Preston was in the middle of a confident laugh with one of the Synapse board members. He looked up as the Beaumont team entered, his smile ready, his hand outstretched. His eyes met Robert Chen's, then moved to the woman standing beside him. His smile didn't just falter, it evaporated. The color drained from his face. His hand, which had been extended for a handshake, hung awkwardly in the air. He looked at Olivia as if he were seeing a ghost in a $4,000 power suit. Brenda's reaction was even more pronounced. Her perfectly made-up face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Her jaw literally dropped. The pen in her hand clattered onto the polished mahogany table. Olivia, however, felt a strange, icy calm settle over her. All those nights studying all those challenges from her cousins, all the pressure, it had forged something new inside her. She held Preston's gaze for a heartbeat, offering no recognition, no flicker of their shared past. Then she coolly looked away, turning her attention to the head of the Synapse board. "Good morning, Mr. Webb," she said, her voice even and professional. "I am Olivia Adler from the Beaumont board. Thank you for accommodating this meeting." The name Adler didn't register with Preston. He had only ever known her as Olivia Montgomery. But Beaumont, the name hung in the air like a thunderclap. The meeting began and the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Preston was completely off his game. He stumbled over his opening remarks, his usual slick presentation reduced to a series of nervous platitudes. He kept glancing at Olivia, his mind clearly racing, trying to solve an impossible equation. How was the timid little drafter he'd discarded sitting at the table with one of the most powerful private corporations in the world? Brenda, after her initial shock, tried to recover. She jumped in attempting to steer their presentation back on track, but her voice was a little too sharp, her smile a little too brittle. She looked at Olivia with a venomous jealousy that was almost palpable. When it was Beaumont's turn, Robert Chen laid out their offer, a comprehensive long-term strategic partnership that promised not just capital, but access to Beaumont's global research and distribution networks. Then he turned to Olivia. Ms. Adler has been the driving force behind our interest in Synapse. Perhaps she could share her vision for your technology. This was it, the moment she had been unknowingly preparing for. She stood feeling the eyes of everyone in the room on her, especially Preston's. Mr. Webb, she began, her voice resonating with a quiet confidence she never knew she possessed. Montgomery Capital sees Synapse as an asset to be acquired, leveraged, and likely sold for a profit in 5 years. They are financiers. They see a balance sheet. She saw Preston flinch at the directness of her attack. We at Beaumont see something different. We see a future. My background is in design and structure. I see the bones of things. And Synapse's AI isn't just a product. It's a foundational technology. We don't want to buy you. We want to build with you. We envision your robotics integrated into our automated pharmaceutical labs, your predictive AI optimizing our sustainable urban developments. We offer not an exit strategy, but a legacy. She spoke for 10 minutes, her arguments clear, insightful, and passionate. She laid out a detailed decade-long vision that was so far beyond Preston's simple financial bid that it made his offer look amateurish and predatory. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Mr. Webb and his board were visibly impressed. Preston, desperate to regain control, jumped in. That's a very romantic vision, Ms. Adler, he said, his voice dripping with condescension, trying to re-establish their old dynamic. But in the real world, business is about numbers. Our offer is solid, liquid, and immediate. He tried to use her old last name, a slip of the tongue that was both a mistake and a power play. Ms. Adler, perhaps you're not familiar with the pressures of this market. Olivia didn't even look at him. She addressed her comments to Mr. Webb. Some people can only see the price of things, not their value. We believe Synapse's value is immeasurable, and we are prepared to invest in it for the long term. Our offer reflects that. The meeting concluded shortly after. As they were packing their briefcases, Preston cornered her by the door while Brenda watched from a distance, her arms crossed. Olivia, he hissed, his voice low and urgent. What is this? What the hell is going on? She finally turned to face him, her expression as placid as a frozen lake. I'm not sure I understand the question, Mr. Montgomery. Don't play dumb with me, Beaumont. How my family has been in business for quite some time, she said, the statement both true and intentionally evasive. His face cycled through confusion, then dawning greedy realization. Your family, you come from money. You never told me. The sheer audacity of it, the immediate assumption that she had hidden wealth from him, was almost comical. The things you don't know about me could fill a library. Preston, she said softly. She then looked past him at Brenda, who was glaring daggers at her. Olivia offered her a tiny, dismissive smile. It was a pleasure competing with you, she said, the words a master class in professional dismissal. I'm sure we'll see each other around. She walked out of the boardroom, leaving Preston and Brenda standing amidst the wreckage of their failed bid, staring after a woman they thought they knew, a woman who had just dismantled them without even raising her voice. The cheerleader hadn't just bought the team. She had just beaten the star quarterback at his own game on his own field. And she knew with chilling certainty that this was only the beginning. The Synapse Dynamics deal closed in Beaumont's favor a week later. The victory was sweet, not because she had beaten Preston, but because she had won on her own merits. The win solidified her standing with the board, and even Jeffrey and Camilla's snide remarks became less frequent. They now watched her with a wary resentment rather than open disdain. But Olivia's analytical mind couldn't let go of a detail from the failed bid. Preston's offer for Synapse had been recklessly high, almost desperately so. It was an all-cash offer that for a firm of his size would have represented a massive financial stretch. It wasn't ambitious, it was foolish. Why was he gambling so aggressively? Driven by a mix of professional curiosity and a lingering sense of self-preservation, she decided to dig deeper. She now had the vast resources of Beaumont Enterprises at her disposal. She made a quiet request to Beaumont's internal corporate intelligence division, a team of forensic accountants and analysts who could uncover the financial secrets of entire nations. "I want a full deep-dive workup on Montgomery Capital," she told the division head. "Everything. Debt structure, investment vehicles, cash flow, key partners. I want to see their entire house of cards." While the investigation hummed along in the background, Olivia had to deal with a more immediate threat. Camilla and Jeffrey, seeing their chances of ousting her dwindle, decided to play their final, dirtiest card. A story suddenly appeared in a notorious European tabloid syndicated online across the world. The headline was "Salacious Billionaire's Secret Granddaughter, a Chambermaid's Child. The Battle for the Beaumont Fortune Turns Ugly." The article, filled with anonymous family sources, painted Olivia as a grasping opportunist. It fabricated a story that her father was not a poor artist, but a hotel porter with whom her mother had a scandalous affair. It claimed Olivia had known about her connection to the Beaumonts for years and had orchestrated a scheme to swindle the true heirs. It was a vile classist attack designed to paint her as illegitimate, unworthy, and a fraud. The blow was personal and public. Her phone lit up with calls from Mr. Davies and the Beaumont PR team. The board was in an uproar. Camilla and Jeffrey feigned outrage. "This is a disgusting attack on our family's integrity," Jeffrey boomed in an emergency conference call. "We must find the source of these lies." Olivia knew with absolute certainty that the source was on that call. But she had no proof. For the first time, she felt the immense pressure of her position. The world was watching. Her family was trying to destroy her. She didn't crumble. She got to work. She called Jessica Chen not as a friend, but as a professional. "Jess, I need a journalist, the best. I need to trace the source of a story, and I need to do it quietly." Jessica, fiercely loyal, mobilized her network. Within 48 hours, she had a name, a freelance gossip columnist known for taking cash for stories. A little more digging, facilitated by a Beaumont security consultant, uncovered a series of encrypted messages and an offshore wire transfer. The money had been funneled through a shell corporation, but the trail ultimately led back to a holding company owned by Jeffrey Beaumont. It was the smoking gun. Armed with this evidence, Olivia didn't go to the press. She went to the board. In a closed-door emergency session, she presented her findings calmly and methodically: the digital trail, the financial records, the irrefutable link to her cousins. The silence in the room was absolute. Camilla's face was ashen. Jeffrey was sweating profusely, his florid face turning a shade of purple. They had been caught, their petty, vicious scheme laid bare. This was not a business disagreement. Olivia said, her voice low but carrying the weight of command. "This was an attempt to destroy my reputation and destabilize this company for personal gain. This is a betrayal not just of me but of my grandfather's legacy and the duty we all have to this board." The vote was unanimous. Jeffrey and Camilla Beaumont were stripped of their board seats and their executive positions effective immediately. They were escorted from the building by security, their decades of scheming ending not with a bang, but with a quiet, humiliating walk of shame. Just as the dust was settling on her internal victory, the head of corporate intelligence delivered his report on Montgomery Capital. It was far worse than Olivia could have imagined. Preston's firm was not just over-leveraged, it was a fraud. He had built his success on a sophisticated Ponzi scheme. He used massive influxes of cash from new investors to pay off earlier ones, all while reporting inflated imaginary profits. The entire enterprise was hollow. He funneled millions into offshore accounts to fund his and Brenda's lavish lifestyle, The penthouse, the sports cars, the designer clothes, the very ring on her finger were all paid for with stolen money. The report concluded that Montgomery Capital was on the verge of collapse. The desperate all-cash offer for Synapse Dynamics had been a last-ditch effort to acquire a legitimate high-value asset that could be used as collateral to secure more funding and keep the scheme alive for another cycle. If he had won that deal, he would have sucked Synapse dry and destroyed it. Olivia hadn't just outmaneuvered him, she had inadvertently saved an innocent company from his parasitic grasp. Staring at the report, Olivia felt a cold clarity. This was bigger than their personal history. Preston wasn't just an arrogant ex-husband, he was a criminal who had defrauded dozens of investors, many of whom were pension funds and retirement accounts. He was ruining innocent people's lives. She thought about the humiliation he had put her through, the condescending smirks, the casual cruelty. She could, with a single phone call, leak the report to the financial press and watch his empire burn. It would be the ultimate revenge. But as she looked out at the city from her grandfather's office, she realized revenge was too small a motive. This was about justice. It was about responsibility. Her grandfather hadn't just left her his money. He had left her his power, and power was a burden as much as it was a privilege. She picked up the phone, but she didn't call a journalist. She called Mr. Davies. "Alistair," she said, her voice firm with resolve. "I need you to arrange a meeting for me with the Securities and Exchange Commission." She wasn't just going to watch his house of cards fall. She was going to be the one to push it over. The stage for the final act was fittingly another charity gala. This time, it was the prestigious Children's Hospital Foundation Ball, an event where the city's old money and new tech titans mingled. Beaumont Enterprises was the lead sponsor, and as the newly consolidated power on the board, Olivia was expected to give the opening address. She stood backstage, elegant in a deep emerald gown, a stark contrast to the simple navy dress she had worn to the gala that had started it all. She was no longer the invisible woman shrinking in the corner. She was the center of gravity in the room. Out in the ballroom, Preston and Brenda were making their rounds. To the outside world, they were still the golden couple. News of their failed Synapse bid had been a minor setback, but Preston, a master of spin, had brushed it off as a strategic retreat. They had no idea that federal investigators, armed with the meticulously detailed dossier Olivia had provided, had spent the last 2 weeks building an ironclad case against Montgomery Capital. They had no idea that their world was about to end. Olivia watched them on a monitor. Preston was holding court, a glass of champagne in his hand, laughing his confident laugh. Brenda stood beside him, preening under the admiring gazes, her diamond ring flashing under the chandeliers. They were performing their success, oblivious to the fact that the curtain was about to come down. It was time. Olivia walked onto the stage to a round of warm applause. She approached the podium, her gaze sweeping across the sea of faces. She saw Preston look up at her, a flicker of something, annoyance, resentment in his eyes. She began her speech not with platitudes about charity, but with a story about her grandfather. She spoke of his belief that true wealth wasn't about accumulation, but about building things that last: companies, communities, and most importantly, trust. "Trust," she said. Her eyes finding Preston's in the crowd, is the bedrock of everything we do, in business and in life. It is a fragile thing, easily broken. And when it is broken, not for reasons of failure or misfortune, but through deliberate deception, the damage can be catastrophic. A subtle shift occurred in the room. This was not the standard fundraising speech. As she spoke, 2 well-dressed but stern-looking men entered the ballroom from a side entrance, followed by 2 more. They moved quietly, professionally, their eyes scanning the room. They were not guests. Olivia continued, her voice steady. There are those who build their empires on foundations of integrity. And there are those who build houses of cards, dazzling illusions designed to fool the world, propped up by deceit. But a house of cards, no matter how grand, can never withstand the slightest breeze of truth. Preston's smile was gone. He was looking at the men now, a dawning horror on his face. Brenda, sensing the change in his demeanor, looked from him to the agents, her expression turning from smugness to confusion. The agents were moving towards their table. "Tonight we are here to support an institution built on trust and care," Olivia said, her voice rising with finality. "Let us be reminded that our community is only as strong as its most honest members, and let us have the courage to hold accountable those who would tear it down for their own selfish gain." She finished her speech, and the room, sensing the undercurrent of immense drama, responded with thunderous applause. But Olivia's attention and everyone else's was now on Preston's table. One of the agents leaned down and spoke quietly to Preston. "Mr. Preston Montgomery, I'm Agent Miller with the SEC Enforcement Division. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. Please come with us." A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Phones were instantly raised, recording the scene. Brenda let out a small, strangled cry, stumbling back from the table as if Preston were suddenly contagious. Preston's face was a mask of disbelief and fury. "This is ridiculous. It's a mistake," he blustered, but there was no conviction in his voice. "There's no mistake, sir," the agent said, his voice flat. As they handcuffed him, Preston's wild, panicked eyes found Olivia on the stage. She was standing perfectly still, watching the scene unfold, not with glee or triumph, but with a calm, somber finality. In that moment, he understood. The anonymous competitor who had snatched Henderson's firm. The mysterious power player at the Synapse meeting. The breeze of truth that had just blown over his house of cards. It was all her. He was led out of the ballroom past the shocked faces of the city's elite, a babbling, pathetic shell of the titan he pretended to be. Brenda stood alone, a pariah in her blood-red dress, the diamond on her finger suddenly looking like a piece of cheap glass. Later that evening, as news of the arrest exploded online, a journalist caught Olivia as she was leaving. "Ms. Adler, your speech was incredibly timely. Do you have any comment on the arrest of Preston Montgomery? A man sources say you have a personal history with Olivia." Looked into the camera, her expression composed and powerful. "Mr. Montgomery's downfall was a result of his own choices. My grandfather's company, Beaumont Enterprises, was made aware of certain financial irregularities, and as is our corporate and ethical duty, we passed that information on to the proper authorities. Our only interest is in maintaining a fair and transparent market for all investors. I have no further comment on my personal history." It was a perfect, devastatingly professional statement. It positioned her not as a vengeful ex-wife, but as a principled corporate leader. A protector of the legacy she now fully controlled. She walked away from the cameras, leaving the frenzy behind. She didn't feel the thrill of revenge she might have once craved. Instead, she felt a quiet sense of peace. The ghosts of her past had been laid to rest not by bitterness, but by her own competence, strength, and integrity. She had not only stepped out of Preston's shadow, she had become a force of nature that cast a shadow of her own, one built not on lies, but on the solid foundation of the Beaumont name, a name she had truly made her own. Olivia Adler's journey from a humiliated ex-wife to a billionaire powerhouse is more than just a revenge story. It's a powerful testament to the strength that lies dormant within us all. It shows that our past does not have to define our future, and that true power isn't found in wealth, but in self-worth, integrity, and the courage to rewrite our own narrative. She didn't just inherit a fortune. She earned her legacy. What did you think of Olivia's incredible transformation? Was her final move against Preston justice or revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you and discussing every twist and turn of the story. If you were captivated by Olivia's rise from the ashes, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves a story of ultimate triumph. And of course, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next gripping tale. Thank you for listening.